One of my favorite games is a game that always stayed in the underground, never quite reaching the spotlight it deserved on Steam or the level of other roguelike dungeon games that had similar premises plus challenge and level design. This is one of the most underrated games I have played throughout my many years of seeing this game develop from in beta testing to its full release in 2018. This is what I have observed. The changes between the several years of development, you can see a huge switch in the game's design and gameplay, going from very low quality pixels to much more vivid and detailed in its visual style, but still keeping the pixelated style, like many games do. It is a game that I find very nostalgic. In the course of 11 years, I still find myself thinking of this game and the idea to make a video. In fact, I played it on my own channel many years later just to revisit the experience. Originally, this game was released on mobile back in 2013 by the group Priority Interrupt, notably Joshua Skeleton, which sounds like skeleton, and Chad Cuttigan. The game fits under the umbrella of a roguelike dungeon crawler. This type of game is usually a subcategory of fantasy roleplay, where you navigate your character usually either in first-person view or top-down view of a semi-3D environment, and you move through an underground dungeon fighting enemies, avoiding booby traps, solving puzzles, etc. Speaking of which, the sprites in this game are 2D, however many of the structures and objects are 3D. Mixing two different dimensions into one game is very common, but turning it into an art style is quite impressive to say the least. I'm going to make a rough overview of the game, as another YouTuber goes into much more depth on this game, so I will leave a link in the description to their video, as it's also the only other video I have found going into depth at all and talking about this game to begin with, other than a simple gameplay or review. Now, to get things started, your character starts off in the woods, presumably in a remote forest, who courses through the tutorial level, which gets you comfortable with the game, fighting a few enemies and upgrading a few times before you reach a mysterious orb until an ultimately plain demise for your character. Death is not the end, but was only the beginning. When you respawn, it is a bit different this time, as you are now in a different area where you can meet 4 individuals that are camping in the woods. One sells magic, one sells useful items, while the old man talks to you about the dungeon, and the guy playing the nice music says nothing. After admiring the forest of the 16-bit style game, you won't be seeing anymore because you will now enter the dungeon. You will find yourself dying several times in this game. Believe me, there is no ability to change the difficulty, as each level ascending into the dungeon will become more difficult with stronger enemies and different naturally randomly generated levels. Once you die, you're dead. There is no revival. Every time you die, the map will change when you respawn your character, so good luck getting used to the dungeons. Because the game is a dungeon crawler, there are of course 3 different main classes of weapons to choose from. Melee, which there are plenty of different sorts of weapons you can find. Ranged, which uses a bow and arrow, and magic, which uses one that have charges. I also somewhat see the resemblance on this game to Doom 1993, as your character had a 2D weapon that shoots at a 2D sprite, but there was an animation for when they die with blood, and their body stays on the ground in the same way that enemies are destroyed in this game from the first person player, and they do not despawn. Especially for the pixelated style of these two games, just something I felt like I should point out. In the vanilla game, there are 4 different stages, each having their own sub-levels and mini semi-hub worlds. I say semi because they only allow access to the hub world above and below. This allows access to lower and higher levels as well. The first stage you will begin as you enter the dungeon. This is the least challenging of the 4 and has the most organized rooms. Some of these rooms are libraries, others are bricked rooms with torches and pools of water that intersect with each other that resembles a well. This is also the only stage that has humanoid type enemies. They are much easier to defeat than the later enemies. After the first 2 levels, which are on the first stage, level 3 starts in the second stage, which is cave themed. There are cobwebs everywhere throughout the level that will slow your character down, so make sure to avoid them. Most of these enemies on this stage are insect-like creatures, the undead, and eyeballs that shoot fire charges at your character. I remember these enemies being some of the most infuriating instances. Some of the ground is also unpredictable, so make sure you don't fall to your death, as that seems to be a very common way of dying in this game, as you lose 1,000 health. The third stage is sewer themed and has some of the biggest and most elaborate designs for the levels. If you check your map, you can see how crazy these rooms can get. Rivers of water and brick flow through the entire level in a much more true labyrinth. These bricks are notably different in color to the dungeon themed bricks. You will also find goblin enemies down here that are a bit stronger than the regular humanoid enemies. Once you pass through the rift, which is the final semi-hub world, you will reach the fourth and final stage of the game. These are the ruins. They are full of undead enemies that are very strong and relentless. The mage skeletons are able to fire 3 different forms of magic charges at your player, dealing deadly effects. While this stage is also rife in booby traps, there are spikes all over the walls and giant crushing pillars that also do much damage to the player if the player is crushed by them. After going through the final stage, you will end up at the lowest point of the dungeon. This place is called the Ythidia. As you can see, it has the same name as the orb in the beginning of the game. Ythidia contains the same red mysterious orb that you find in the tutorial of the game, which is what I'm talking about. You must defeat a very strong undead boss called the Lich, who has its own magic effects. He is also the only boss in the entire game. Once defeated, you can now obtain the orb, and this is when shit starts getting real. You have to run to the surface while being chased by the undead enemies until you escape the entire dungeon and enter back into the surface world. Because you already have your map, you can navigate through, and it can make things a bit easier, but it's still quite a challenge either way. Once you reach the surface of the world, this time it is a bit different. You find a white glowing sphere that you will talk to that will end the game. And other than that, I'm not going to say much because I don't really want to spoil the whole game, but to get the game mechanics down, it's definitely nice to talk about what's out there and the things that you can find and the unique experience that it brings. Speaking of which, the lore. It seems that lore-wise, there's not much to talk about, but there are hints and messages scattered throughout the game, like finding secret areas behind hidden walls, and I wonder if to an extent that the developers of this game wanted to leave it intentionally vague, so you as the player can create your own interpretation and story of the game. It's one of those games that you will pick up several years later and play it like you did when you were younger, like I did when I was 10 years old. I really appreciate how this game is paced. The leveling up system is set up in a way where you can pick different areas that you can upgrade your character, that you can benefit your gameplay in the way that suits you. You want to be fast instead of more health. You have the option to choose speed instead. If you want to be a mage, you can upgrade your magic with every level, or combat that will increase the strength of your melee weapons, etc. The food is also a great way to heal your character, as it would make sense, and because you cannot heal your health otherwise without potions, depending on the food, some can heal much more than others, and makes finding food that of much more valuable source, as it's the same feeling you would feel trying to survive, although the ale, for whatever reason, heals a shit ton. I don't know why, it's like 40 seconds. The last part of this video I want to mention is the potions and the way they work. I honestly was so confused the first time when I was younger when I used them, so I would just not drink them at all because of this, which was really unfortunate, because actually understanding now and watching the other video and the wiki explaining this, I'll just put it here because I'm the most recent person to explain this. They come in 6 variants, which the colors themselves don't actually have any significance at all. Keep that in mind. The only significance about the color is to distinguish them from their differences. The way you would distinguish different values on paper, for example, or a symbol or letter. For each gameplay, like how the stage level layout of the maps, they are randomly generated. Well, their effects are randomly generated, that is. So are the stats for weapons and potions that you find. However, with the potions, they have different effects that will be the same effect for each time you use it once you have drunk that color. At first, they stay as a question mark, which is unknown until you drink the potion. For example, if you haven't drank a potion yet, it'll be a question mark, as I said. If a green potion you find out is poison, it will stay poison for the rest of the game until you die or reset through the gameplay. If red was healing, you find out it would stay healing, well, healing for red potions, not all potions. Other useful tools are the scrolls, which are magic items that will give you benefits or temporary supernatural abilities, like the ability to teleport or levitate. Levitate can get you out of some icky situations. I did that when I fell into a pit of lava and there's no way of getting out, and thankfully I had one. So use those when you get a point, because there's no way you can escape some areas without those. As well, shields can protect you and give you more defense in the same way that armor does, while candles and lanterns will light up the areas around you if held in the opposite hand, having different variations of luminosity, at least I think so. Bombs also have their own variants, and you should be careful when around them, as you can die if it explodes too close to you. This is one of the worst and most common ways to die besides falling, because I think most people underestimate the bombs. Not to mention, purple vases and potions can explode too, for whatever reason. I didn't make the rules, man. Anyways, to conclude, there's much more content to this game. While it isn't a relatively massive game, it definitely can serve you several hours of gameplay, as when I played the game, I spent about 4 hours playing it, although that was because I died several times and I had some mods installed. But you could still guarantee a 2-hour full gameplay of this if you played the entire vanilla gameplay. The Steam Workshop contains several mods that you can add onto the game, and some of these mods fit really well with the style of the areas. Some of them are complete overhauls to the game and change the texture of the look of the game. Some of these mods even add entire new enemies and stages to the game with their own theme. I definitely check out the Steam Workshop if you are interested, but I will leave a description on the game to make it easier so you don't have to dig it up in the wastelands of the ethers of the internet. Other than that, that's the end of my video. I do have a Discord server, so please go check that out if you are interested in talking and meeting a community. If you enjoy my content, consider subscribing and liking, and I also have a gaming channel, so make sure to check those out, and I will see you all in the next video. See ya.